We're back with another installment in the historic draft grade series, and this time we're going all the way back to arguably the most talented class of them all, being the class of 1996. From top to bottom, especially at the bottom, this draft was filled to the brim with all-stars, Hall of Famers, and all-time talent. It was tough to go wrong with the amount of star talent in this class, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. While several teams hit big home runs, a few still managed to fumble the bag and take duds with their picks. Even though this happened years ago, you all are bound to recognize a ton of names mentioned, which is what makes it so historically great. Before we get started though, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as all support is very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. Starting with the first pick in the draft, the Philadelphia 76ers selected Allen Iverson. Despite being slightly undersized and playing more of a combo guard style than pure point guard, Iverson overcame all of it and exceeded to the highest degree. He overcame these obstacles with explosive athleticism, top-tier speed, ball handling skills that were like nothing anybody had ever seen, and just a pure ability to score the ball from all three levels. He played his heart out every night and won over the fans of Philadelphia more than anyone else ever had. He won 4 scoring titles, an MVP award, and was a member of the All-NBA team 7 times. His success all culminated in 2001 when he dragged Philadelphia to the finals to face the Lakers, where they eventually lost, but those Laker teams were historically good with Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal, so it's not the worst loss in the world. He may not have a ring, but he's still an all-time great guard who changed the game both on and off the floor, so for a grade, this one obviously gets an A+. Next up with the second pick in the draft, the Toronto Raptors selected Marcus Camby. Camby wasn't exactly the most dominant big man throughout his career offensively, but on defense, he was an absolute force. He established his presence on that end immediately as a rookie, and from there, he started to rack up the accolades. He was voted as one of the best defenders in the league by being named to the all-defense teams on 4 separate occasions. He led the entire league in blocks per game 4 different times, and he even has a Defensive Player of the Year award to his name. He was the perfect balance of physical and smart with how he protected the rim, and driving with him in the middle was never an easy task. Overall, he was a pretty good player, but not a great player, with the amount of talent in this class taking him at number 2 overall results in a grade of a B. Next up with the third pick in the draft, the Vancouver Grizzlies selected Shareef Abdur-Raheem. Shareef was one of the more underrated players from this class for sure, but despite that, he carved out a very strong and productive career for himself in the league. He was a combo forward that did a lot of his damage down around the basket because of his combination of strength, finishing ability, and amazing footwork that made him incredibly tough to cover in the post. He averaged over 20 points per game for 5 straight seasons, and was the star of the Grizzlies in that span as well. With that said though, he was only a fringe all-star caliber player whose prime didn't last very long, and I did say last video that I would be stricter with the grades, so because of this, combined with the fact that he was taken as high as he was, this pick gets an A- grade. Next up with the fourth pick in the draft, the Milwaukee Bucks selected Stephon Marbury, but then traded him to Minnesota on draft night. Marbury was another fun-to-watch, electrifying guard like Iverson was, but in terms of actual talent and production, he wasn't as good. He often flashed potential of superstardom, but his play was way too erratic and inconsistent to ever actually hit that level. He played 13 years in the league, in which most of them were at a very high level, and then at the relatively young age of 31, he chose to go over to China, where he would become a legend in the game over there. He scored over 20 points per game in 7 straight seasons while in the NBA, and averaged over 8 assists per game in that span as well, making him a very productive point guard. He was good and was fun to root for, but he still doesn't get the A+, with this pick coming in just shy at an A grade. Up next with the fifth pick in the draft, the Minnesota Timberwolves selected Ray Allen and immediately traded him to Milwaukee in the trade I mentioned last pick. The NBA back in the 90s and early 2000s weren't exactly the most three-point shot focused, yet Ray Allen came in and shot threes at a higher volume than ever before seen from a player. Ray was taking over 7 attempts from 3 per game, which at the time was a lot, and he was still knocking them down at a clip over 40% easily. Before Steph Curry came into his prime, Ray was seen by many as the greatest shooter ever, and for good reason, but he also was much more than just a shooter. He was pretty good at driving to the basket and finishing strong, he could create off the dribble, and then the shooting topped off his elite offensive play. At his peak, he was a 26-point-per-game scorer, and he has 2 rings to his name that he played a vital role in earning both. The Bucks definitely got the better end of this draft day trade, and for the grade, this pick does get an A+. Next up, with the 6th pick in the draft, the Boston Celtics selected Antoine Walker. Walker is one of the strangest players to try to grade as a pick because his play was so inconsistent. Walker was a guy who loved to shoot the ball, maybe a little too much. He, like Ray Allen, was ahead of the game when it came to taking threes at large volume, but the problem was that he was only a mediocre shooter at best, and oftentimes his scoring was very inefficient. He was a 3-time All-Star, but in 2 of those seasons, he shot below 40% from the field, which just doesn't exactly seem like all-star efficiency. He was a stretch 4 before stretch 4s became widely accepted, and perhaps was ahead of his time. For a grade, he was a good player in a weird way, so it gets an A-. Next up, with the 7th pick in the draft, the Los Angeles Clippers selected Lorenzen Wright. After so many strong picks in a row, this is the point where things begin to drop off a tad bit. Wright carved out a nice 13-year career for himself in the league, where he was essentially a role player that rounded out the lineup as a center. He wasn't the best scorer by any means, but he averaged a modest 8 points per game in his career, and he rebounded relatively well too. He's not a bust because he earned a fairly big role on teams for over a decade, but he also wasn't that good of a player, so for the grade, it comes out somewhere in the middle, being a C-. Next up, with the 8th pick in the draft, the New Jersey Nets selected Kerry Kittles. For a little bit of backstory on this pick in particular, the Nets were actually planning to take none other than Kobe Bryant in this spot, but they were told by his camp that he wouldn't play in New Jersey. Still, they were very much tempted to call their bluff and take him anyway, but for a new GM and young head coach in John Calipari, it wasn't a risk that they felt comfortable taking, so instead they went with Kittles. Kittles by no means was a disappointment, he's just not Kobe, so it still stings a little bit. Kittles at his best was an excellent wing player that shot the ball very well and provided good all-around play on both ends. He played a big role on the Nets teams that went to the finals in the early 2000s, and his shooting helped open up things for those around him. The pick gets a grade of a B+, but just imagine if they took Kobe, it possibly could have been an A+. Next up, with the 9th pick in the draft, the Dallas Mavericks selected Samaki Walker. Walker only ever proved to be a decent reserve at the power forward position, but he was a decent rebounder and defender, which was his main role on teams. After 7 seasons as a serviceable role player, he struggled with injuries, and his career only lasted 3 more seasons, where his appearances were brief. This was one of the weakest picks in the lottery of this class, so as a result, the grade here is a D for the pick. Next up, with the 10th pick in the draft, the Indiana Pacers selected Erick Dampier. Dampier is another guy who, as a big man, carved out a long career in the league playing a reduced role on offense, but providing very solid defense. He also averaged 12 rebounds per game in his best season, so he did a very good job crashing the glass as well. He didn't really have the best touch around the basket, and for a big man like him to shoot in the low 40s for field goal percentage, it's pretty poor. Again, we're getting a bit further down in the lottery, so the expectation isn't for players to be stars necessarily, but even as a role player, he was only ever decent, so the grade here is a C. Up next, with the 11th pick in the draft, the Golden State Warriors selected Todd Fuller. To this point, every player mentioned at least became a decent player in the NBA and made a nice career for themselves, even if it was just as a bench player, except for now. Fuller is the bust of the draft, being someone who only lasted 5 years in the league and didn't exactly do much in those seasons. He truly was someone who pretty much only played garbage time and sat at the end of the bench more often than not. This one doesn't need much explanation because the pick gets a grade of an F. Next up, with the 12th pick in the draft, the Cleveland Cavaliers selected Vitaly Potapenko. The last pick was bad, and this one wasn't exactly much better considering how little he did in the league and who was taken with the very next pick. Vitaly is a career 6.5 point per game scorer as a center, a decent rebounder, not the best defender, and not the most skilled. He averaged double-digit points once in his 11-year career, and the most value he's brought to a team has probably come in his coaching career that started after after his playing days finished up when he was on the coaching staff of the Cavaliers' 2016 championship team. Overall, though, the pick gets a D, being very subpar. And finally, with the last pick of the lottery, because back in 1996, only 13 teams were included in it, the Charlotte Hornets selected Kobe Bryant and then traded him to the Lakers. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, Kobe did not want to play in a small market, and he and his group made this very well known. So when the team took Kobe, they used him as trade bait for Vlade Divac, which seemed okay at the time, but boy would they go on to regret it. Kobe's greatness is so well known at this point, and the legend that he was on and off the court is inspiring to all. He won 5 championships in LA, an MVP award, countless All-NBA and All-Defense honors, and just about every other individual accolade you can get. For a grade, this is tough because while the Hornets are the ones that took him, they're not who he played for, so I'll give a grade to each team in the deal. The Hornets obviously get an F for giving him up so easily, and the Lakers here get the rare A++ for going out and acquiring him. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below other draft classes you would want to see graded historically. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.